The mountain pass leading to Blackcrest kept its bitter chill even in midsummer. Lady Elara Luminov clutched her fur-lined cloak tighter as the royal carriage jolted across another rut in the ancient road. Her handmaiden, Sybil, reached across to steady her mistress as the carriage pitched sideways. "Careful, my lady," Sybil murmured. "These mountain paths are treacherous." "As treacherous as my father's ambitions," Elara replied, her voice barely audible over the howling wind that found every crack in the carriage's wooden frame. Ilara's pale fingers traced the embroidered crest on her handkerchief, a silver dove in flight against a blue field, the symbol of House Luminov. Soon she would bear a different crest, the crimson bat of House Draconis, rulers of Blackcrest for 10 centuries. The carriage crested the final rise, and Elara leaned forward despite herself. Through the swirling mist emerged Blackcrest Castle, a sprawling fortress of obsidian stone that seemed to drink the very light from the sky. Its towers, sharp as daggers, pierced the low-hanging clouds. Unlike the elegant spires of her homeland, Solaris, these battlements spoke of ancient wars and darker secrets. "They say the castle was built with the bones of 1,000 warriors," whispered Sybil, making a protective gesture, "and that the mortar was mixed with blood." Elara said nothing. Tales of Blackcrest's horrors had reached even sunny Solaris, but she had learned long ago to separate myth from political strategy. Her father, King Uldric, had negotiated this marriage with meticulous care. After centuries of war between their kingdoms, peace would be sealed with her hand and her blood. "Your father assures you'll be safe," Sybil continued, desperate to fill the silence. "The treaty is explicit. No harm shall come to you." "My father assures nothing," Elara said, her blue eyes never leaving the approaching castle. "He guarantees. There is a difference." As the carriage approached the great iron gates of Blackcrest, the honor guard from Solaris, 12 knights in gleaming silver armor, tightened their formation around the vehicle. Captain Thorn, her father's most trusted warrior, rode alongside, his hand never straying far from his sword hilt. The gates creaked open, a sound like the groan of the dying. Inside the courtyard stood the welcoming party, if one could call it that. Figures in deep crimson robes lined the pathway to the castle entrance. Their faces were obscured by deep hoods, and they stood unnaturally still. "Courage, my lady," Sybil whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't bring courage," Elara replied coolly. "I brought purpose." When the carriage finally stopped, Captain Thorn was first to dismount, surveying the courtyard with suspicious eyes before opening the carriage door. He offered his hand to Elara, who descended with practiced grace. The cold hit her anew, but she refused to shiver. 22 years as the daughter of King Uldric had taught her that weakness was never to be displayed, especially before potential enemies. Her silver-blonde hair was arranged in an elaborate style that showcased the slender column of her neck, a deliberate choice, given the proclivities of her soon-to-be husband. From the shadows of the castle entrance emerged 3 figures. 2 were guards in black armor that seemed to absorb the fading daylight. Between them walked a tall, imposing man who could only be Lord Chancellor Varnis, advisor to the Vampire King. "Lady Elara of House Luminov," the Chancellor announced, his voice carrying an unnatural resonance across the courtyard. "Blackcrest welcomes you on this historic day. His Majesty, King Corvus Draconis, awaits your presence in the throne room." Elara inclined her head slightly, enough to show respect but not submission. "I thank His Majesty for his welcome. I come in the name of lasting peace between our realms." The words were rehearsed, diplomatic, and utterly void of the turmoil churning within her chest. 6 months ago, when her father had announced her betrothal to the Vampire King, she had smashed every mirror in her chambers, not from fear. Elara Luminov did not fear, but from the cold realization that she was nothing more than currency in her father's political exchange. Chancellor Varnis smiled, revealing teeth that were too perfect, too white. "If you would follow me, my lady, your servants may accompany you to your chambers, but only you are expected in the throne room." Captain Thorne stepped forward. By terms of the treaty, Lady Ilara's personal guard remains with her until after the binding ceremony. A flicker of annoyance crossed the Chancellor's face, quickly smoothed away. Of course, 2 guards may accompany her. The rest will be shown to suitable quarters. Ilara selected Captain Thorne and his lieutenant Sarah to accompany her. Sarah, though younger than most of the guard, had reflexes like lightning and was one of the few female knights in her father's service. Ilara trusted her implicitly. As they passed through the massive doors into the castle proper, Ilara noted the absence of windows in the entrance hall. Instead, ornate chandeliers filled with thousands of candles illuminated the space, casting writhing shadows across walls decorated with tapestries depicting ancient battles. The floor was polished black marble, reflecting their procession like a dark mirror. The corridors seemed to twist and turn without logic, and Ilara carefully memorized each turn: left, right, right, left, straight ahead through an archway carved with bats in flight. Finally, they reached a set of doors so tall they disappeared into the shadows of the ceiling. 2 guards stood motionless before them, their armor making no sound as they stepped aside. "The throne room," announced Chancellor Varnis. "His Majesty awaits." The doors swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a cavernous chamber. Unlike the rest of the castle, this room had windows, enormous arched panes of stained glass that depicted not religious scenes, but rather the history of House Draconis. The fading daylight filtered through them, casting pools of colored light across the gathered court. And they were gathered, dozens of figures in formal attire, standing in perfect formation on either side of a central aisle. Their stillness was unnerving, as was the silence that greeted Ilara's entrance. No whispers, no shifting of feet. Only watchful eyes that followed her progress toward the dais at the far end of the hall. Upon that dais sat a single throne, carved from what appeared to be obsidian, and upon the throne, Ilara's step faltered almost imperceptibly. King Corvus Draconis was nothing like the monster of her imagination. The vampire king was young, or appeared so, for vampires age differently, perhaps no more than 30 by human standards. His features were aristocratic: high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that seemed to shift between grey and silver, depending on how the light caught them. His hair, black as midnight, was tied back from his face with a simple leather cord, revealing the sharp points of his ears. He wore no crown. Instead, a simple circlet of dark metal rested on his brow, set with a single blood-red stone. His clothing was elegant but austere, a doublet of midnight blue embroidered with silver thread, black trousers, and boots that reached his knees. The only concession to royal ostentation was the cloak fastened at his shoulders with twin clasps shaped like bats in flight. As Ilara approached, the king rose from his throne in one fluid motion. He moved with the predatory grace that all vampires possessed, yet there was something measured in his movements, as though he deliberately restrained his supernatural speed to appear more human. "Lady Ilara of House Luminov," he said, his voice surprisingly warm and resonant. "Blackcrest has waited long for this day." Ilara sank into the curtsy she had practiced 1,000 times. "Your Majesty honors me with this welcome." When she rose, she found him studying her with unconcealed curiosity. His gaze wasn't lascivious, as she had feared, but rather contemplative, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle. "You are not what I expected," he said, quiet enough that perhaps only she could hear. "Nor you, Your Majesty," she replied with equal softness. The slightest smile touched his lips before he turned to address the gathered court. "Today marks the beginning of a new era. For centuries, Blackcrest and Solaris have shed each other's blood on the battlefield. Today, blood will be shared in peace." The assembled courtiers finally broke their silence, applauding with perfect synchronicity. The sound echoed off the high ceiling, hollow and rehearsed. Chancellor Varnis stepped forward. "The binding ceremony will take place at midnight, 3 days hence, on the full moon. Until then, Lady Elara will be treated with all honors due her station." King Corvus returned his attention to Elara. "You must be weary from your journey. Allow me to escort you to your chambers myself." This deviation from protocol sent a ripple of surprise through the court. Elara caught Chancellor Varnis's momentary frown before it was smoothed away. "Your Majesty is most gracious," Elara replied, inclining her head. As the king descended the dais, the courtiers bowed deeply. Captain Thorne and Lieutenant Sarah fell into step behind Elara as King Corvus offered his arm. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand upon it, feeling the cool silk of his sleeve beneath her fingers. "Your guards may follow at a distance," he said quietly. "I assure you, no harm will come to you within these walls." "So the treaty guarantees?" Elara replied. "The treaty?" Something in his tone made her glance up at him. "Yes, the treaty guarantees many things." They walked in silence through corridors even more labyrinthine than those she had traversed earlier. Occasionally, servants would appear, bowing deeply before continuing their tasks. Elara noted that some appeared human, while others clearly were not, their movements too graceful, their skin too pale. "You have questions," the king said suddenly, as they ascended a spiral staircase. "Many, Your Majesty. You may ask them." Elara considered carefully. "Is it true that Blackcrest Castle was built with the bones of your enemies?" A surprised laugh escaped him, a sound so unexpected that both Thorne and Sarah tensed behind them. "Of all the questions you might have asked," he said, genuine amusement in his voice. "No, Lady Elara. The castle is built of stone quarried from these very mountains, though I cannot speak for what my ancestors might have mixed into the mortar." His attempt at humor caught her off guard. "I see your reputation for frankness is well earned, Your Majesty." "Corvus," he said. "When we are not in formal settings, I would have you call me Corvus." They reached a landing where the staircase opened onto a wide corridor. At the end stood a set of double doors, guarded by two of the silent black-armored figures. "Your chambers," he explained, leading her forward. "I had them prepared in the east wing, where you might enjoy the morning sun. I understand it is important to your people." The consideration surprised her. "Thank you, Corvus." His name felt strange on her tongue, forbidden almost. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth when she said it. The guards opened the doors without command, revealing a suite that defied Elara's expectations. Instead of the Gothic darkness she had anticipated, the rooms were appointed in rich blues and silvers, the colors of her house. Tall windows lined one wall, currently covered with heavy velvet drapes, but clearly positioned to catch the morning light. "These rooms connect to chambers for your handmaiden and your guards," he explained, indicating doors to either side. "You will find your belongings have already been brought up." Indeed, her trunk stood neatly arranged near a large wardrobe. Sybil was already there, directing servants in the unpacking of Elara's gowns. "You've thought of everything," Elara observed, turning slowly to take in the chamber. "I have tried." Corvus remained near the doorway, as though hesitant to enter further without invitation. "There is something else." He gestured to one of the guards, who stepped forward bearing a small wooden box. Corvus took it and approached Elara, opening it to reveal a delicate silver key. "This is the key to your chambers, the only key. It locks from within. While you are here, this space is yours alone. No one, not even I, may enter without your permission." Elara took the key, studying it in the light of the candles. "Another guarantee not in the treaty." "The treaty was negotiated by kings and chancellors," he said quietly. "This is between you and me." Their eyes met, and for a moment Elara glimpsed something unexpected in the vampire king's gaze, a vulnerability at odds with everything she had been told about his kind. "I shall leave you to rest," he said, stepping back. "We will speak again at dinner. My chancellor will send someone to escort you at the appropriate hour." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Elara replied, slipping back into formality as servants and guards looked on. Corvus inclined his head and turned to leave. At the doorway he paused. "Lady Elara." "Yes? There is much about this arrangement that neither of us chose. But I would have you know that I intend to honor not just the letter of our agreement, but its spirit as well." Before she could respond, he was gone, the doors closing softly behind him. Elara stood motionless in the center of the chamber, the silver key cool against her palm. Captain Thorne approached, his expression troubled. "My lady, I mislike this place. These vampires are our allies now, Captain," she interrupted. "Or will be in 3 days' time." Sarah joined them, her voice low. "The king seems different from what we were told." "Yes," Elara agreed, turning the key over in her hand. "But appearances can deceive." She crossed to the windows and pulled back the heavy drapes. Night had fallen completely now, revealing a sky scattered with stars above the jagged peaks of the surrounding mountains. Somewhere beyond those peaks lay Solaris, her home, her past. "My lady," Sybil called, holding up a gown of midnight blue velvet. "For dinner tonight." Elara nodded and moved away from the window. As her handmaiden helped her change, she caught sight of herself in a large mirror mounted on the wall, another unexpected courtesy in a vampire castle. Her reflection showed a woman composed and regal, betraying none of the confusion swirling within. In 3 days, she would be bound to King Corvus Draconis in a ceremony sealed with blood. But something in his manner, in the privacy of that key now hanging from a chain at her waist, whispered of possibilities beyond the cold political alliance her father had forged. As she fastened a silver necklace bearing House Luminov's dove emblem, perhaps for the last time, Elara made a silent vow. Whatever game was being played between kingdoms, she would discover the truth behind the vampire king's unexpected courtesy. And when she did, she would decide for herself what destiny awaited them both. The dinner gong echoed through Blackcrest Castle with a resonance that seemed to vibrate through stone and bone alike. Elara adjusted the silver dove pendant at her throat one final time, her fingers lingering on the familiar emblem. After tonight, she might never wear it again. "You look magnificent, my lady," Sybil murmured, stepping back to admire her handiwork. The midnight blue gown complemented Elara's pale complexion and silver-blonde hair, which Sybil had arranged in an intricate style adorned with small diamond pins that caught the light like stars. The effect was deliberate, to remind these creatures of darkness that she came from the kingdom of the sun. "Remember your training," Captain Thorne said, his voice low as he assumed position by the door. "Touch no food until others have partaken. Accept no wine served separately from the common vessel." "I'm well aware of the precautions against poison, Captain," Elara replied, though she appreciated his concern, "though I doubt King Corvus would violate the treaty so blatantly." "Vampires are creatures of deception," Sarah added, checking the silver dagger concealed in her sleeve. "My grandmother told me they can cloud minds with a single glance." Elara smiled thinly. "Then avoid their gaze. But remember, we are guests here, diplomatic representatives. Unless directly threatened, show nothing but courtesy." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Captain Thorne opened it cautiously, revealing a young woman in a grey dress, her eyes cast downward. "My lady," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I am Lena, sent to escort you to dinner." Elara studied the girl. Unlike the vampire courtiers, this servant appeared human, pale, yes, but with a flush of colour in her cheeks. "Thank you, Lena. Lead on." With Captain Thorne and Lieutenant Sarah flanking her, Elara followed the servant through the twisting corridors of Blackcrest. Lena moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had navigated these passages countless times, yet there was a tension in her shoulders that spoke of perpetual alertness. "You serve in the castle, Lena?" Elara asked, breaking the silence. The girl glanced back, surprise flitting across her features at being addressed directly. "Yes, my lady, since I was a child." "Are you from the village below?" I was born here in the castle, Lena replied. My mother serves as head of the laundry. It is an honor for humans to serve at Blackcrest. The slight hesitation told Ilara more than the words themselves. She filed this observation away, another piece in the puzzle of this strange kingdom. They descended a grand staircase into the central hall, before turning down a corridor lined with portraits. Ilara slowed, studying the faces of what must be the Draconis lineage. Each ruler was depicted with the same silver-grey eyes as Corvus, though their expressions varied from benevolent to cruel across the centuries. The Hall of Ancestors, Lena explained, noticing Ilara's interest. Every Draconis ruler since Malachi the Founder. Ilara paused before the final portrait. A woman with sharp features and those distinctive silver eyes, her expression fierce yet dignified. Unlike the others, she wore armor rather than royal robes. Queen Ravenna, Lena said quietly. King Corvus's mother. She led our armies against Solaris in the Battle of Shattered Light. Ilara knew the battle well, a devastating defeat for Solaris 30 years ago before her birth. Her father rarely spoke of it, but the veteran still bore scars, both physical and otherwise. She fell in that same battle, Lena continued, the only Draconis ruler to die in combat in 3 centuries. Before Ilara could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. Chancellor Varnis appeared, his crimson robes replaced with formal black attire, a silver chain of office gleaming against the dark fabric. Lady Ilara, he said, bowing with practiced precision, you honor us with your punctuality. Allow me to escort you the rest of the way. He dismissed Lena with a flick of his fingers, the girl immediately disappearing down a side passage. Ilara noted how Varnis positioned himself between her and Captain Thorne, a subtle assertion of control over their progress. I trust your chambers are satisfactory, he inquired as they walked. Most thoughtful, Ilara replied. The king was kind to consider my preference for sunlight. Something indecipherable flashed across Varnis's face. His Majesty has been unusually accommodating in matters concerning your arrival. The implication hung in the air, neither accusation nor compliment, but something in between. Before Ilara could probe further, they arrived at a set of ornate doors guarded by 4 of the black-armored sentinels. The king's dining hall, Varnis announced as the doors swung open. Unlike the throne room with its imposing formality, the dining hall combined grandeur with a surprising intimacy. A long table of polished ebony dominated the space, set for perhaps 20 guests rather than the hundreds the room could clearly accommodate. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, their countless candles creating an illusion of starlight above. At the far end of the table stood King Corvus, engaged in conversation with a woman whose beauty was so striking that Ilara momentarily faltered. The woman's hair fell in waves of midnight black, her skin like porcelain, her gown a deep crimson that complemented Corvus's midnight blue attire so perfectly it could not be coincidence. The king looked up at their entrance, his expression brightening. Lady Ilara, he called, breaking away from his companion to approach. You honor us. The honor is mine, your majesty, she replied with a curtsy, acutely aware of the beautiful woman's calculating gaze upon her. You must meet my court, Corvus said, offering his arm. As she took it, he added in a lower voice, I apologize for the scrutiny you must endure. Many here have never met a noble of Solaris who wasn't across a battlefield. Then I shall endeavor to represent my kingdom favorably, Ilara replied, matching his quiet tone. He led her around the table, introducing her to each guest. Most were vampire nobles of House Draconis or allied houses, their manner ranging from coldly polite to genuinely curious. 2 were human diplomats from neighboring kingdoms, their relief at seeing another human face poorly concealed. Finally, they approached the beautiful woman in crimson, who had taken position near what was clearly Corvus's seat at the head of the table. Lady Ilara, may I present Lady Mireille Bloodcrest, daughter of Duke Silas Bloodcrest, my father's most trusted general. Mireille's curtsy was technically perfect, yet somehow managed to convey superiority rather than deference. "Lady Elara," she purred, her voice like velvet over steel, "how brave you are to venture so far from the sun." "Lady Mireille," Elara replied, matching her tone precisely. "How fortunate I am to meet one so clearly devoted to the king's court." Mireille's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I've served as King Corvus's trusted advisor these past 5 years, since his coronation. Then I shall value your guidance as I learn the customs of my new home," Elara said, noting how Mireille's eyes flashed at the words, "my new home." Indeed. The vampire woman's gaze flickered to where Elara's hand still rested on Corvus's arm. "Though some customs may prove difficult for someone of your background to embrace." Before Elara could respond, Corvus smoothly intervened. "Lady Elara brings her own valuable perspective, Mireille. The alliance benefits from fresh eyes." He guided Elara to her seat at his right hand, the position of highest honor, while Mireille took the place to his left. Captain Thorne and Lieutenant Serra were stationed at the wall behind Elara, their discomfort at being unable to sample the food before her evident in their rigid posture. As servants began bringing in the first course, Elara noticed that while wine was poured for all guests, additional goblets of a deeper, more viscous liquid were placed before the vampire nobles. Corvus, she noted with interest, had both. "We do not subsist on blood alone," he said quietly, noticing her observation, "though it remains essential to our nature." "I did not mean to stare," Elara apologized. "Curiosity is natural," he replied, "as is wariness. I assure you the blood is freely given by willing donors who are well compensated." "Willing humans are essential to a properly functioning court," Mireille interjected, lifting her goblet. "Though some find the practice distasteful." The challenge in her words was unmistakable. Elara met her gaze steadily. "In Solaris," she said, "we believe that understanding precedes judgment. I would learn your ways before forming opinions on them." Corvus's expression remained neutral, but Elara caught the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth. "Wisely said, Lady Elara." The first course arrived, a soup of clear broth with delicate herbs that reminded Elara, unexpectedly, of home. She waited until others had begun eating before taking her first spoonful, a precaution that did not go unnoticed by the court. "Do you fear we would poison you at the king's own table?" asked an older vampire lord seated across from her, his tone somewhere between amused and offended. "Lord Thanatos," Corvus warned, but Elara raised a hand. "Not at all, my lord," she replied smoothly. "In Solaris, it is custom to allow the host to lead in all things, including the commencement of each course. I merely observe the courtesies of a guest." Her diplomatic response drew appreciative nods from several at the table, including, surprisingly, Chancellor Varnis, who sat several places down. Conversation flowed more naturally after that, centering mostly on neutral topics: the harsh mountain weather, the forthcoming autumn festival, recent developments in trade with the Western kingdoms. Elara participated when addressed directly, but primarily observed, gathering impressions of the court's dynamics. It was clear that factions existed, those who deferred to Mireille, those who looked to Chancellor Varni, and a smaller group who seemed to hold personal loyalty to Corvus himself. What was less clear was where the real power lay, and which faction viewed the alliance with Solaris most favorably. As the main course was being served, roast venison for the humans, accompanied by something rare and unidentifiable for the vampires, Corvus turned the conversation toward Elara herself. "Lady Elara, I understand you served as your father's emissary to the Coastal Confederacy, a complex political landscape by all accounts." Elara was surprised he knew of this. "Yes, for 2 years. The Confederacy values its independence fiercely, but we found common ground in matters of maritime law." "She negotiated the Treaty of 3 Harbors," Mireille said, clearly having done her research. "Quite an achievement for one so young." The compliment carried a subtle barb, a reminder of Elara's relative youth compared to the centuries-old vampires around the table. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted at the entrance to the dining hall. A guard burst in, his black armor spattered with what appeared to be fresh blood. He rushed to Corvus, dropping to one knee. "Your Majesty," he gasped, "forgive the interruption. There's been an attack at the eastern checkpoint. 3 soldiers dead, 2 grievously wounded." The dining hall fell silent. Corvus rose from his seat, his expression darkening. "Who dares?" "Rebels, sire. They left their mark." The guard handed over a small object. Ilara caught a glimpse of it as Corvus examined it in his palm, a carved wooden sun, its center stained crimson with blood. "The Dawn Breakers," Chancellor Varnis hissed, rising as well. "They grow bolder." Murmurs swept through the gathered nobles. Ilara felt the weight of accusatory stares shifting toward her and her guards. "Rebels?" she asked, keeping her voice level despite the tension crackling through the room. "Terrorists," Mireille corrected sharply. "Vampire hunters who oppose the peace. They've been a nuisance for years, but lately—" Her eyes narrowed at Ilara. "Lately, their attacks have increased, coinciding, some might note, with news of the Alliance." The implication hung in the air like a blade. Captain Thorne stepped forward, hand moving toward his sword, but Ilara subtly motioned him back. "If you're suggesting Solaris supports these rebels—" she began, but Corvus cut her off with a raised hand. "No one is suggesting anything of the sort," he said firmly, though several expressions around the table suggested otherwise. "The Dawn Breakers oppose me, not Solaris. They believe vampires and humans cannot coexist in peace. And now they kill to prove it," Varnis added grimly. Corvus turned to the guard. "Assemble the night patrol. I want the mountain passes secured and the bodies of our fallen retrieved with honor. Double the guard at all checkpoints, especially those nearest the village." "Yes, sire," the guard replied, bowing before hurrying out. Corvus addressed his guests. "I apologize for this disruption. Please continue with your meal. Chancellor Varnis, Lord Thanatos, Lady Mireille, join me in the strategy room immediately." As the named individuals rose, Corvus turned to Ilara. "Lady Ilara, please accept my apologies for cutting our evening short. I will have guards escort you safely to your chambers." "Of course, Your Majesty," she replied, rising as well. "May I offer my condolences for your fallen soldiers? Violence serves no cause but destruction, especially now when peace is within reach." Something softened in Corvus's expression. "Thank you. We will speak tomorrow, when this matter is addressed." As he turned to leave, Mireille paused beside Ilara, leaning close as if sharing a confidence. "What interesting timing," she murmured, her breath cold against Ilara's ear. "Rebels with sun emblems growing bold, just as Solaris sends its princess to our door." "I find violence abhorrent, Lady Mireille," Ilara replied evenly. "As does my father." "Of course," Mireille smiled, her teeth gleaming in the candlelight. "Sleep well, princess. If you can." With the screams of the wounded echoing through these mountains, she swept away after Corvus, leaving Ilara standing rigidly amid the dissolving dinner party. Captain Thorne moved immediately to her side. "My lady, we should return to your chambers immediately. This development is concerning." "Yes," Ilara agreed, her mind racing. "But not for the reasons Lady Mireille implies." The journey back to her chambers was tense, with Captain Thorne and Lieutenant Sarah watchful for any threat. Once safely inside with the doors locked, Ilara finally allowed her diplomatic mask to slip. "This complicates matters," she said, pacing before the unlit fireplace. "If these rebels, these Dawnbreakers, oppose the Alliance, they could jeopardize everything. Or provide a convenient excuse if King Corvus wishes to break the treaty," Sarah suggested. Thorne nodded grimly. "The timing is suspicious. A bloody attack just as you arrive? It casts doubt on Solaris's intentions." "Or," Ilara countered, "it's exactly what it appears. Extremists who oppose peace between our kingdoms." She moved to the window, pulling back the heavy drapes to gaze out at the moonlit mountains. The night landscape of Blackcrest was beautiful in its stark severity, so different from the rolling meadows and gentle forests of her homeland. "Captain, I need you to send a message to my father," she said finally. He must be informed of these rebels and their use of sun imagery. If they're attempting to implicate Solaris in their attacks, we must distance ourselves immediately. I'll dispatch a rider at first light, Thorn promised. No, Elara shook her head. Use the enchanted scroll in my personal chest. This message must reach him tonight. While Thorn retrieved the magical parchment, one of only 3 such scrolls Elara had brought, each imbued by the royal mages with the power to transfer written words instantly to its counterpart in King Aldrich's possession, Sybil began preparing her mistress for bed. "What do you make of King Corvus?" Elara asked her handmaiden, as Sybil carefully removed the diamond pins from her hair. Sybil considered the question seriously. "He seems not what I expected. There's a sadness in him, and that Lady Mireille, she watches him like a hawk." "Yes," Elara agreed. "I suspect she had aspirations to be more than his advisor before our alliance was proposed." "She hates you," Sybil said bluntly, setting the hairbrush down. "The way she looked at you during dinner, it was like watching a serpent consider its prey." "Then I shall have to be vigilant," Elara replied, taking the nightgown Sybil offered. "What troubles me more are these rebels. Their timing cannot be coincidence." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah answered it cautiously, hand on her weapon, but relaxed slightly at what she found. "A message, my lady," she said, bringing a sealed parchment to Elara, "from King Corvus." The parchment bore the king's personal seal, a bat with wings outstretched, impressed in silver wax. Elara broke it carefully and unfolded the message. "Lady Elara, I regret the unpleasant end to our dinner and any distress it may have caused you. Please know that the safety of all within Blackcrest, including you and your people, is my highest priority. I would speak with you privately tomorrow. There are matters concerning our alliance that require discussion away from certain ears at court. If agreeable, meet me in the Eastern Tower Observatory at midday. Your guards may accompany you to the tower, but must wait outside during our conversation. With respect, Corvus." Elara read the message twice before passing it to Captain Thorn, whose frown deepened as he scanned the contents. "A private meeting? Out of the question, my lady, especially after tonight's events. Yet refusing would suggest mistrust at a time when trust is essential," Elara countered. "Besides, the tower is bathed in sunlight at midday. No place could be safer for me in a castle of vampires. Unless this is a trap to separate you from your protection," Sarah pointed out. Elara considered this possibility as she moved to her writing desk. "Perhaps. Or perhaps King Corvus has information he cannot share freely with his court." She took up a quill and drafted a brief reply, accepting the meeting. As she sealed her response, she couldn't help but wonder what the Vampire King wished to discuss that required such secrecy. The attack, the treaty, or something else entirely, something he feared his own court discovering. Later, as she lay in bed listening to the distant howl of wind through the mountain passes, Elara found sleep elusive. In less than 72 hours, she would be bound to Corvus Draconis in marriage, sealing an alliance generations in the making. Yet forces were already working to undermine it before it could begin. The wooden sun emblem, stained with blood, troubled her. Who would use Solaris's symbol in such a manner? Was it truly rebels, opposed to vampire-human peace? Or something more sinister, a deliberate attempt to sabotage the alliance from within one of their kingdoms? And what of Corvus himself? His courtesy seemed genuine, his desire for peace sincere, yet he ruled a court divided, with powerful figures like Mireille and Varni pursuing their own agendas. As Elara finally drifted towards sleep, one thought remained. In the game of royal politics, the true challenge was not identifying enemies, but discovering which allies could actually be trusted. Tomorrow's private meeting might reveal which category Corvus Draconis truly belonged in, and whether her father had sent her into a trap from which even the daughter of Solaris could not escape. The Eastern Tower Observatory was flooded with sunlight, just as Elara had predicted. Shafts of golden light poured through tall windows, arranged in a perfect circle, illuminating a space filled with astronomical instruments, charts of the night sky, and a large telescope pointed toward the heavens. It was a room devoted to studying the darkness from within the light, a fitting metaphor for her current position. Ilara's fingers traced the silver key at her waist as she waited. Captain Thorne and Lieutenant Serra had reluctantly remained outside as requested, their displeasure evident in every line of their posture. She had promised to call out at the first sign of trouble, but all three knew that in Blackcrest, help might come too late regardless. The door opened, and King Corvus entered alone. Sunlight caught his features, and Ilara was struck by how different he appeared in full daylight. Though his skin remained pale, it did not burn or smoke as legends claimed. Instead, he merely squinted slightly, his pupils contracting to thin vertical slits before adjusting to the brightness. "You came," he said, genuine relief in his voice. "Thank you. Your invitation suggested urgency," Ilara replied, maintaining a diplomatic distance, "and I confess to curiosity about what requires such privacy." Corvus moved to the center of the room, carefully skirting the brightest patches of sunlight, not avoiding them entirely, she noted, but minimizing exposure. "What do you know of the Dawnbreakers?" he asked without preamble. "Only what was revealed last night, that they oppose peace between our kingdoms and have adopted a perversion of Solaris's emblem as their symbol." "They are more than simple rebels," Corvus said, his voice tightening. "They are fanatics who believe vampires are an abomination to be purged from this world. Their philosophy holds that humans who willingly cooperate with vampires are traitors to their species." He turned to face her directly, the sunlight casting half his face in gold, the other in shadow. "The Dawnbreakers have existed for centuries, but they were little more than a nuisance until recently. In the past year, they've grown organized, better equipped, more lethal." "Coinciding with news of our alliance," Ilara observed. "Precisely." Corvus gestured toward a table where a map of the region was spread out. Red markings indicated attack sites, concentrated along the border between their kingdoms. "They oppose our union because it represents the possibility of lasting peace, a future where humans and vampires might coexist." Ilara studied the map, noting patterns in the attacks. "These aren't random. They're targeting supply routes and communication posts, strategic objectives." "You have a military mind," Corvus remarked, surprise evident in his tone. "My father insisted I understand warfare as thoroughly as diplomacy." She traced a line between several attack points. "Someone is guiding them with tactical expertise." "Yes," Corvus agreed grimly, "which brings me to why I asked you here." He hesitated, then continued with evident difficulty. "I have reason to believe there may be elements within Solaris supporting the Dawnbreakers." Ilara's head snapped up, indignation flashing across her features. "Impossible. My father would never—" "Not your father," Corvus interrupted gently, "but perhaps those who oppose him, those who view this alliance as treason to Solaris?" The suggestion gave Ilara pause. There had been opposition to the treaty, certainly. Lord Commander Helios, her father's military advisor, had argued vehemently against it. Several noble houses with long histories of vampire hunting had withdrawn from court in protest. "What evidence do you have?" she asked finally. Corvus reached into his doublet and withdrew a small object wrapped in silk. Unwrapping it carefully, he revealed a broken hilt of a dagger. Silver, inlaid with blue sapphires arranged in a distinctive pattern. Ilara's breath caught. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. "This is Solarian work from the Royal Armory, found in the hand of a Dawnbreaker who tried to assassinate me 3 months ago," Corvus said quietly. "He was killed by my guards before he could be questioned, but this could not be mistaken." "This dagger," Ilara said slowly, her mind racing through implications, "bears the maker's mark of Master Tobias, my father's personal weaponsmith. These are only given to members of the Royal Guard, or as gifts from the king himself. I have not shared this with my court," Corvus continued. "If Mireille or Varnis knew, They would use it to invalidate the treaty before the binding ceremony could take place. Understanding dawned on Ilara with chilling clarity. You suspect sabotage from within Solaris. Someone high in my father's confidence, betraying both our kingdoms. Or, Corvus added, his voice dropping even lower, someone positioning themselves to blame Solaris when the alliance inevitably crumbles. The implication hung heavy between them. Ilara's mind whirled with possibilities, none of them comforting. If someone from Solaris was arming the Dawnbreakers, it constituted high treason. If someone from Blackcrest was framing Solaris, it suggested the peace was doomed from the start. "Why tell me this?" she asked finally. "Why not confront my father directly?" Corvus moved closer, lowering his voice despite their solitude. "Because I'm not convinced the threat comes only from Solaris. There are those in my court who have opposed this alliance from the beginning, who believe vampires should rule over humans, not join with them as equals." "Lady Mirelle," Ilara surmised. "Among others." Corvus nodded. "The attack last night was too perfectly timed, as if someone wanted to cast suspicion on you immediately upon your arrival." A chill ran down Ilara's spine as pieces began falling into place. "You think there may be collaboration between enemies in both our kingdoms? It would explain the coordination, the strategic nature of the attacks," Corvus confirmed. "Two factions united by their hatred of peace, working to ensure our kingdoms remain at war." Ilara paced the circular chamber, sunlight playing across her silver-blonde hair as she processed this theory. It made a terrible kind of sense, explaining both the timing of the attacks and their effectiveness. "If you're right," she said, turning back to him, "then our wedding is in grave danger. They won't allow the binding ceremony to proceed if it truly seals an unbreakable peace, which is why I need your help," Corvus said, closing the distance between them. For the first time, he fully entered a shaft of sunlight, showing no discomfort despite the brightness that made his skin almost luminous. "I need someone I can trust, someone with access to Solaris's intelligence, someone whose interest in peace is genuine." "And you believe that person is me?" Ilara asked, searching his silver eyes for deception. "I believe," he said with unexpected gentleness, "that neither of us entered this arrangement by choice, but I also believe we both recognize its necessity. War has bled our kingdoms for centuries. This alliance offers a different path forward." Something in his earnestness struck Ilara. She had come to Blackcrest expecting a monster, a marriage of convenience and politics, nothing more. Yet Corvus spoke of peace with passion, exposed himself to painful sunlight to meet on her terms, and shared intelligence that his own advisors would weaponize. "What do you propose?" she asked. "We must identify the conspirators before the binding ceremony," Corvus replied. "I've instructed my most trusted guards to investigate certain members of my court, but I need your insight on who from Solaris might be involved." Ilara considered for a moment before reaching into the hidden pocket of her gown. She withdrew the enchanted scroll, its edges faintly glowing with magical energy. "I sent my father a message last night about the attack," she explained. "His response arrived this morning." She unrolled the parchment, revealing King Aldrich's elegant script. "Daughter, disturbing news indeed. The Dawnbreakers were a forgotten cult. I am troubled by their resurgence and their perversion of our emblem. More troubling still is their timing. Trust no one until you have proof of loyalty. Remember what I taught you. In diplomacy, what remains unsaid often matters more than spoken words. A final warning. The falcon flies at dusk, but the owl sees in darkness. Father." Corvus frowned at the cryptic final line. "A code." "A warning," Ilara clarified. "The falcon is Lord Commander Helios, whose house bears that sigil. The owl," she hesitated, "the owl is the symbol of House Nightshade. Countess Nightshade." Corvus's expression darkened. "She was instrumental in negotiating preliminary terms of our treaty." "Exactly," Ilara nodded. My father is telling me that Lord Commander Helios is making overt moves against the Alliance, but Countess Nightshade, who publicly supports peace, may be working against us in secret. This confirms my suspicions, Corvus said, pacing now. A coordinated effort from both sides, but we still need proof, names, details of their plans. There may be a way, Ilara said slowly, an idea taking shape. Tonight is the formal welcome ball for the Solaris delegation, is it not? With representatives from both kingdoms present. Yes, though after last night's attack, security will be heightened. Perfect, Ilara said. We should use the ball to our advantage. While all eyes are on us, we can observe who speaks with whom, which factions seem aligned. Corvus considered this, then nodded. We could go further. If we were to stage a disagreement, something convincing, but not severe enough to threaten the Alliance, it might encourage the conspirators to approach whoever they believe sympathetic to their cause. A performance, Ilara agreed, a slight smile touching her lips. To flush out our enemies. For a moment, they stood together in the sunlight, co-conspirators rather than diplomatic pawns. Ilara was struck by how natural it felt to strategize with him, how easily they had shifted from cautious diplomatic counterparts to allies. There's something else, Corvus said, his tone shifting. Something about the binding ceremony you should know. He moved to one of the bookshelves and retrieved an ancient tome bound in dark leather. Opening it carefully, he revealed yellowed pages covered in an arcane script Ilara didn't recognize. The ceremony isn't merely symbolic, he explained, his finger tracing lines of text. When a vampire of royal blood binds with a human of equal standing, the magic is transformative. We will be linked, not just politically but spiritually. Ilara felt her pulse quicken. What exactly does that entail? A sharing of essence, Corvus said, meeting her gaze directly. You won't become vampire, but you will gain certain aspects: extended life, enhanced senses, resistance to illness. And I will regain some human qualities long lost to me, such as the ability to walk freely in daylight, for one, he said, gesturing to the sunlight he stood in with evident discomfort. What you see now is endurance, not comfort. After the binding, the sun would no longer pain me. Ilara absorbed this revelation, understanding now why some in his court might oppose the union beyond political reasons. A vampire king who could walk in daylight would be truly formidable, upsetting the natural balance of power that had kept the species separate for centuries. And there's more, he continued, turning the page to reveal an illustration of two figures surrounded by swirling energy. The binding creates a connection between minds, not thought-reading, but awareness, emotions, proximity, general well-being. We would sense each other, Ilara murmured. Yes. It was originally designed to prevent betrayal between royal houses, Corvus explained. One cannot plot against someone who can sense their intentions. The implications were staggering. This was far more than the political marriage she had been prepared for. It was a fundamental transformation, a permanent connection to a being she barely knew. Why wasn't I told? She demanded, anger flaring suddenly. Did my father know? The full nature of the binding is known only to the royal families, Corvus replied. I assumed King Aldrich would have explained it to you privately. Ilara turned away, moving to the window to gather her thoughts. Had her father known and deliberately kept it from her? Or had he been ignorant of these deeper implications as well? Either possibility unsettled her. I understand if this changes your willingness to proceed, Corvus said quietly behind her. The treaty could be renegotiated for a less intimate arrangement. Ilara stared out at the mountains, considering her options. The alliance was necessary. Generations of war had proven that neither kingdom could truly defeat the other. But a binding of this nature went beyond duty to kingdom. It was personal in ways she hadn't anticipated. No, she said finally, turning back to face him. The alliance must proceed as planned. If we renegotiate now, it shows weakness, division, exactly what our enemies want. Relief visibly washed over Corvus's features. You're certain? I came to Blackcrest prepared to bind my life to yours for the sake of peace, Ilara said firmly. The nature of that binding may be different than I imagined, but the purpose remains the same. A strange expression crossed Corvus's face, something like admiration mixed with regret. You would sacrifice your independence, your very humanity, for your kingdom. Not sacrifice, Ilara corrected him. Transform. As you said, I remain human, just more. And transformation is the essence of diplomacy, finding the place where different worlds can meet. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Corvus stepped closer, close enough that Ilara could see flecks of darker grey in his silver eyes. We have less than 2 days to identify the conspirators and prevent whatever they're planning, he said. Tonight's ball will be dangerous. Then we should prepare, Ilara replied, matching his intensity. What shall we argue about, Your Majesty? A smile touched his lips. Something convincing. The treatment of humans in Blackcrest, perhaps. Or vampire hunting laws in Solaris. Both excellent choices for genuine discord, Ilara agreed, finding herself returning his smile. And afterward, Corvus said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, we meet in the castle library at midnight. The eastern section has a hidden chamber known only to Draconis rulers. We can compare what we've learned in absolute privacy. The plan set, they moved toward the door, their earlier wariness replaced with a fragile alliance of their own. As Corvus reached for the handle, Ilara touched his arm lightly. Why did you trust me with this? She asked. You could have investigated quietly, kept your suspicions to yourself. Corvus considered her question carefully before answering. Because when you arrived, you looked at me. Truly looked at me, instead of seeing the monster you expected. That kind of courage deserves honesty in return. Before she could respond, he opened the door, instantly reverting to formal politeness as Captain Thorne and Lieutenant Serra came into view. I trust our discussion has clarified the ceremonial protocols, Lady Ilara. Indeed, Your Majesty, she replied smoothly, falling into the performance that would now define their public interactions. I appreciate your patience with Solaris's traditions. As they parted ways in the corridor, Ilara felt a strange sense of anticipation replacing her earlier dread. Tonight's ball would be a dangerous game of deception and discovery. The binding ceremony, with its unexpected magical implications, loomed just beyond. And somewhere in Blackcrest Castle, conspirators were moving against them both, determined that the sun and moon would never share the same sky in peace. What none of them yet realized was that the greatest threat lurked much closer than anyone suspected, and had been watching their meeting in the observatory with eyes that saw everything, including the growing connection between vampire king and human princess that went dangerously beyond political necessity. The ballroom of Blackcrest Castle blazed with light, a deliberate statement from a vampire court that could have hosted their gathering in comfortable darkness. Crystal chandeliers suspended from vaulted ceilings cast prismatic reflections across the obsidian floor, creating an illusion of dancing on starlight. The effect was breathtaking, and entirely for Ilara's benefit, a fact not lost on the Solarian princess as she entered on Corvus's arm. She was acutely aware of every gaze that followed them. Lady Mireille, resplendent in a gown of blood-red silk that made her pale skin appear luminous. Chancellor Varnis, observing from beside a column of black marble, his expression unreadable. The Solarian delegation, a bright island of silver and blue amid the darker hues favored by the vampire court. Remember, Corvus murmured, his lips barely moving as he nodded acknowledgement to a passing noble. Our disagreement must appear genuine without threatening the alliance. I'm well versed in diplomatic theatre, Your Majesty, Ilara replied softly. The question is whether you can match my performance. A flash of amusement crossed his features before disappearing behind the regal mask he wore in public. "I've had centuries to practice deception, my lady." "Yet earlier today you chose honesty instead," she observed. Before he could respond, they reached the center of the ballroom. Corvus raised a hand, and the court fell silent. "Tonight we celebrate new beginnings," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the vast chamber. "For too long, our kingdoms have viewed each other through the lens of conflict. The binding ceremony 2 days hence will transform enmity into alliance, suspicion into trust." His words were met with polite applause that Elara noted varied in enthusiasm throughout the room. Their performance would need perfect calibration to draw out their hidden enemies without jeopardizing genuine supporters of peace. The orchestra began to play, and Corvus turned to her with a formal bow. "The first dance belongs to us, Lady Elara." The dance was a traditional vampire waltz, slower and more intricate than its human counterpart. As they moved across the floor, Elara felt the weight of scrutiny from all sides. This was the first time many in either court had seen their future rulers interact. Every gesture, every expression would be analyzed for weakness or affection. "You dance surprisingly well for someone who claims to have never attended a vampire ball," Corvus remarked, guiding her through a complicated turn. "I studied your court customs extensively before arriving," Elara replied. "Though I confess, the practical application differs from theory." "How so?" Her eyes met his with unexpected candor. "In theory, I was dancing with a monster. In practice," she let the sentence hang unfinished between them. Something shifted in Corvus's expression, a softening that lasted only a moment before he expertly masked it. They were, after all, surrounded by observers with supernatural senses. As the dance concluded, Corvus led her toward a group of Solarian nobles. Their planned disagreement would need an audience from both kingdoms to achieve maximum effect. "Lady Elara," called Lady Mireille, intercepting them with practiced grace, "how magnificent you look tonight, almost illuminated." "Thank you, Lady Mireille," Elara replied evenly. "Your own gown is striking. The color of freshly spilled blood suits you." Mireille's smile tightened imperceptibly. "A compliment indeed coming from Solaris. I understand your kingdom has spilled quite a lot of vampire blood over the centuries." And there it was, the perfect opening for their staged conflict. Elara exchanged the briefest glance with Corvus before allowing indignation to color her features. "The history of violence between our kingdoms has casualties on both sides, Lady Mireille," she said, her voice carrying just enough to attract attention from nearby courtiers. "Though I note that Blackcrest's historical records conveniently omit the vampire raids on human villages that provoked Solaris's defensive measures." A ripple of tension spread through the gathering. Corvus stepped forward, his posture stiffening as though offended. "Defensive measures seems a generous term for systematic hunting, Lady Elara," he said, cold authority entering his tone. "The purge of the eastern valleys claimed over 300 vampire lives, including children who had harmed no one." Elara lifted her chin, playing her role perfectly. "A tragedy, certainly, as was the Midnight Massacre, when your father's armies slaughtered an entire human settlement for harboring a single fugitive vampire hunter." The music had stopped entirely now, the ballroom falling into tense silence as the royal couple's disagreement became the center of attention. From the corner of her eye, Elara noticed Chancellor Varnis drifting closer, his expression one of calculated concern. "Perhaps," Corvus said with deliberate restraint, "this is not the appropriate venue to relitigate centuries of conflict. The binding ceremony—" "Will not erase history," Elara interrupted, allowing genuine emotion to fuel her performance. "If this alliance is to succeed, Blackcrest must acknowledge its role in perpetuating the cycle of violence. Humans in your kingdom still live in fear, treated as little more than walking sustenance." Gasps echoed through the vampire courtiers. Such direct criticism of Blackcrest's social order had likely never been spoken aloud in these halls. Corvus's expression darkened convincingly. And what of Solaris's continuing production of weapons designed specifically to destroy my kind? He countered. Silver-forged blades, sunlight prisms, blessed ash arrows, are these the tools of a kingdom sincerely seeking peace? Lady Mireille stepped back, watching their exchange with barely concealed satisfaction. Around the ballroom, Elara observed courtiers whispering, taking sides, revealing allegiances through subtle positioning and expressions. Perhaps, Chancellor Varnis interjected smoothly, our honored guests require refreshment after their spirited exchange. The night is young, and there will be time to address these complex issues in more appropriate settings. A wise suggestion, Chancellor, Corvus agreed, the ice in his voice gradually thawing. He offered Elara a stiff bow. Lady Elara, would you care for wine? I believe we have imported some from Solaris's southern vineyard specifically for your delegation. The gesture, a peace offering within their staged argument, was perfectly calculated. Elara inclined her head graciously. Thank you, Your Majesty. Perhaps wine will help us remember why we've gathered here tonight. As Corvus departed to fetch the wine himself, an unusual act for a king that would give him opportunity to observe reactions from a distance, Elara found herself surrounded by Solarian nobles eager to express support or concern. Among them was Lady Cassandra Nightshade, the countess her father had warned about. "Quite bold, my lady," the countess murmured, her owl-like eyes watchful beneath elegantly arched brows. Some might say dangerously so. "Honesty between future allies seems essential, don't you agree, Countess?" Elara replied, studying the older woman's reaction carefully. "Honesty, yes," Nightshade agreed with a thin smile, "though perhaps tempered with strategic omissions. Not all truths serve peace." Before Elara could probe further, Captain Thorne approached, bowing formally. "My lady, a message has arrived from King Aldrich. Most urgent." The interruption was not part of their planned performance. Concern flickered through Elara as she excused herself. Thorne led her to a small antechamber off the main ballroom, checking that they were alone before handing her a folded parchment bearing her father's seal. The message was brief, written in her father's own hand rather than dictated to a scribe. "The falcon flies with broken wings." The treaty chest contained false documents. "Trust only the vampire who walks in sunlight." Elara's blood ran cold. The message confirmed her worst fears. Lord Commander Helios had been neutralized, and someone had tampered with the formal treaty documents. But the last line, how could her father know about Corvus standing in the observatory's sunlight? Unless, the realization struck her with chilling clarity. This message wasn't from her father at all. "Captain," she said carefully, "who delivered this?" "One of the Solarian messengers, my lady. He wore the royal livery." Elara folded the parchment slowly, her mind racing. "Find Lieutenant Sarah immediately. The ball has become more dangerous than we anticipated." As Thorne departed, Elara sensed movement behind her. She turned sharply, hand reaching for the concealed dagger at her waist, only to find herself face to face with Corvus. "What's happened?" he asked, setting down 2 goblets of wine. "A false message, allegedly from my father," she explained quickly. "Someone knows about our meeting in the observatory. They're trying to manipulate me." "Us?" Corvus's expression darkened. "The only way anyone could know about the sunlight is if they were watching us. The observatory should have been secure." "Unless they used magic," Elara suggested, "or have allies among your personal guards." "Or yours," he countered grimly. Their eyes met in mutual understanding. The conspiracy ran deeper than either had imagined, reaching into their inner circles. Trust, already a fragile commodity between them, had just become even more precious and limited. "We need to accelerate our plan," Corvus decided. "The binding ceremony is tomorrow night. If they're sending false messages now, they're preparing to strike." Elara finished his thought. "But against which of us? Or both?" Before Corvus could respond, the door to the antechamber burst open. Lieutenant Sarah stood there, blood streaming from a cut above her eye. "My lady, the castle is under attack!" They rushed back to the ballroom to find chaos. The massive windows that lined the eastern wall had shattered inward, showering the gathered nobles with glass. Black-clad figures poured through the openings, faces covered with masks, bearing the perverted sun emblem of the Dawnbreakers. "Protect the king!" shouted Chancellor Varnis as the royal guard rushed to form a defensive ring around Corvus. "Secure Lady Alara!" Captain Thorne bellowed, fighting his way toward his charge with sword drawn. The Dawnbreakers moved with military precision, targeting specific individuals rather than attacking randomly. Several rushed toward Ilara, silver weapons gleaming in the chandelier light. Corvus was faster. With supernatural speed, he placed himself between Ilara and the attackers, his formal attire transforming as darkness seemed to coalesce around him. Leathery wings erupted from his back, tearing through the fabric of his jacket as his nails lengthened into deadly claws. "You will not touch her," he snarled. His voice deepened to an inhuman register that echoed through the chamber. The sight of the vampire king in his true form momentarily halted the attackers, all except one, who hurled a glass orb toward them. It shattered at Corvus's feet, releasing a cloud of golden dust that made him recoil in pain. Sunlight essence, Ilara recognized immediately. A weapon developed in Solaris's secret armories, designed to replicate the sun's burning effect on vampires. Despite his agony, Corvus maintained his protective stance before Ilara. "Run!" he growled through clenched teeth. "Not without you," she replied, drawing her concealed dagger. With a precise throw, she struck the nearest attacker in the shoulder, buying them precious seconds. Around them, the ballroom had become a battlefield. Solarian guards fought alongside Blackcrest's vampire sentinels against the Dawnbreakers. Lady Mireille, her beautiful gown now torn and bloodied, tore out the throat of an attacker with her bare hands. Chancellor Varnis chanted arcane words, summoning shadows that engulfed Dawnbreakers in choking darkness. "This way!" Sarah called, having fought her way to them. She indicated a servant's passage, partially hidden behind a tapestry. "We can reach the king's chambers through the hidden corridors." Ilara helped Corvus, still blinded and weakened by the sunlight essence, toward the passage. Captain Thorne covered their retreat, his silver sword flashing as he held back 3 attackers. "Captain!" Ilara called. "Go, my lady!" he shouted back. "I'll find you when it's secure." The narrow passage twisted through the castle's inner walls, lit only by occasional magical sconces that cast eerie blue light across the stone. Sarah led, sword drawn, while Ilara supported Corvus, who struggled to maintain his footing as the sunlight essence burned through his system. Who would dare attack during a diplomatic gathering? Sarah wondered aloud. "It's suicide. Both kingdoms will hunt them to extinction. Unless that's precisely the goal," Ilara realized, "to ensure both kingdoms blame each other, reigniting the war before the binding ceremony can seal peace." They reached a junction where the passage split in 3 directions. Sarah hesitated, glancing back at them. "The left path leads to the king's chambers, the right to your rooms, my lady. The center continues to the lower levels." Before they could decide, footsteps echoed from behind them. "Someone's following," Ilara whispered. "Take the king to his chambers," Sarah instructed. "I'll delay them." "No," Corvus growled, straightening despite his pain. "We stay together." The decision was made for them, as figures appeared at both the left and right passages. Dawnbreakers, their sun emblems glowing with unnatural light in the darkness. "The center passage," Ilara commanded. "Now!" They fled downward, the passage growing narrower and colder as it descended into the castle's ancient foundations. Behind them, they could hear pursuit, multiple sets of footsteps, moving with unhurried confidence. "They're herding us," Corvus realized, his strength gradually returning as the sunlight essence's effects faded. "This is part of their plan." The passage eventually opened into a vast circular chamber carved directly from the mountain's bedrock. Ancient symbols covered the walls, glowing faintly with magical energy. In the center stood a raised platform of obsidian, upon which rested an altar of the same material. The binding chamber, Corvus breathed, recognition and alarm mingling in his voice. Where the ceremony is to take place tomorrow night. How convenient that you've arrived early, came a silken voice from the shadows. Countess Nightshade stepped into view, no longer the elegant noble from the ballroom. She now wore the crimson robes of a high priestess, the owl emblem of her house transformed into something more sinister, its eyes replaced with twin suns. "You," Ilara whispered, "my father warned me about you." "Your father suspects many things but knows little," Nightshade replied. "For centuries, our order has waited, watching as humans and vampires slaughtered each other in meaningless conflicts. The Dawnbreakers were merely our public face, useful fanatics serving a greater purpose." More figures emerged from the shadows, including, to Ilara's shock, Chancellor Varnis. He no longer wore his formal attire, but rather robes matching Nightshade's, emblazoned with the same corrupted owl symbol. "The Sun Cult and the Blood Order," Corvus growled, recognition dawning. "Ancient enemies of both our kingdoms. We believed you eradicated generations ago." "Not eradicated," Varnis corrected. "Evolved. We realized that fighting separately against the royal houses was futile, but united." He smiled coldly. "United, we could orchestrate the perfect moment for both bloodlines to end." Lieutenant Serra raised her sword, positioning herself protectively before Ilara and Corvus. "You'll have to go through me first." "Oh, we counted on that," Nightshade said with a cruel smile. She gestured lazily. Serra's body went rigid, her sword clattering to the stone floor. Blood began to seep from her eyes, her nose, her ears, as though her body were being crushed from within. "Serra!" Ilara cried, lunging forward, only to be restrained by Corvus. "Blood magic," he hissed, "ancient and forbidden." Serra collapsed, her body twitching in the final throes of life. Ilara felt rage and grief surge through her veins like fire. "The binding ceremony requires royal blood freely given," Varnis explained conversationally, approaching the altar. "But there's another older ritual, one that requires royal blood forcefully taken, the unmaking it was called, the permanent severing of any possibility of alliance between sun and moon." Cultists emerged from all passages, surrounding them completely. Ilara and Corvus stood back to back, she with Serra's fallen sword, he with claws extended and fangs bared. "Your plan fails the moment we refuse to go quietly," Corvus said, his voice deadly calm. "Fighting will only make your deaths more painful," Nightshade replied, "but the outcome remains the same. The unmaking requires the blood of royal vampire and royal human, spilled upon the altar, as the binding words are spoken in perversion." As the cultists closed in, Ilara felt something unexpected, a warmth emanating from the silver key still hanging at her waist. It had begun to glow faintly, resonating with the magical energies in the chamber. Understanding flashed between her and Corvus without words needed. The key wasn't just for her chambers, it was tied to the binding magic itself, a physical representation of the trust between them. "Now!" Corvus roared, unleashing his full vampiric nature. Darkness exploded from him in waves as he launched himself at Varnis. Simultaneously, Ilara swept the glowing key through the air, leaving trails of silver light that solidified into barriers between them and the nearest cultists. The magic her father had embedded in the key, protection spells disguised as simple courtesies, activated fully. What followed was chaos. Corvus tore through the cultists with supernatural speed, while Ilara wielded both sword and key, each movement graceful and deadly. Her years of secret combat training under Captain Thorn proved their worth as she dispatched attackers with precision. Nightshade's blood magic lashed out, catching Ilara across the shoulder and sending searing pain through her body. She stumbled, nearly falling onto the altar itself. "Ilara!" Corvus shouted, momentarily distracted by her cry of pain. Varnis seized the opportunity, driving a silver dagger deep into Corvus's side. The Vampire King roared in agony, black blood spilling onto the chamber floor. Nightshade appeared above Ilara, a ritual knife raised high. "Your blood will end centuries of possibility," she hissed. "The sun and moon will never unite." As the knife descended, Ilara rolled aside, bringing the key up in desperate defense. The blade struck the silver key with a sound like 1,000 screaming voices. Light exploded from the point of contact, throwing Nightshade backward. The chamber trembled as ancient magic awoke, not the dark powers the cult sought to summon, but something older, purer. The symbols on the walls began to glow with increasing intensity, no longer responding to the cult's ritual, but to something else entirely. "The true binding," Corvus gasped, clutching his wounded side as he fought his way toward Ilara. "It's recognizing our intent, our willingness to sacrifice for each other." Understanding dawned on Ilara's face. "We don't need the ceremony. We've already chosen to bind our fates." She reached for him across the altar, their hands meeting amidst the chaos of battle. The moment their fingers intertwined, light and darkness spiraled around them, not opposing forces but complementary ones, day and night in perfect balance. "No!" screamed Nightshade and Varnis in unified horror as the power built to unbearable intensity. The explosion of magical energy sent everyone except Ilara and Corvus flying against the chamber walls. When the light faded, they stood transformed. Corvus's wounds had healed, his eyes now holding flecks of blue amidst their silver. Ilara's hair shimmered with streaks of midnight black among the silver blonde, her blue eyes now ringed with silver. "The binding is complete," Corvus said with wonder, feeling the new connection between them, a bridge of thought and emotion linking their minds. "Not quite," Ilara replied with a smile, drawing him closer. "There's one traditional element we haven't fulfilled." Their kiss was both gentle and fierce, a sealing of their unexpected bond that sent another pulse of magic through the chamber. When they parted, they found the surviving cultists on their knees, magical bindings of light and shadow preventing escape. "Your Majesties!" Captain Thorne's voice echoed down one of the passages moments before he appeared, bloodied but alive, leading a contingent of royal guards from both kingdoms. "The castle is secure. The Dawnbreakers have been captured or scattered." He faltered at the sight before him, his princess transformed, the Vampire King beside her not as captor, but as equal, their hands still joined across the altar that had been intended for their destruction. "Captain," Ilara acknowledged him with newfound authority in her voice. "Perfect timing. We have traitors to imprison and a peace to announce." "The binding ceremony," Thorne began, confused, "has already occurred in its truest form," Corvus finished. "We chose each other, not by political decree, but by free will. The magic recognized what we ourselves had only begun to understand." As dawn approached, Ilara and Corvus stood together on the highest tower of Blackcrest. For the first time in centuries, the Vampire King would witness sunrise without pain, a gift of their binding, along with the shared strength and extended lifetime now granted to Ilara. "They will try again," Ilara said quietly, thinking of the cultists now imprisoned in Blackcrest's deepest dungeons, others who fear what our union represents. "Let them," Corvus replied, his arm tightening around her waist. "The sun and moon have found their balance. Together, we are stronger than either would be alone." As the first rays of dawn crested the eastern mountains, light spilled across the obsidian towers of Blackcrest Castle. Where once that light had signified danger and retreat for its vampire inhabitants, it now heralded a new era, one where darkness and light could coexist in harmony. Ilara turned to Corvus, seeing both the fearsome Vampire King and the man beneath, the leader who had risked everything for peace, who had stood between her and danger without hesitation. In his eyes, she saw her own reflection, no longer just the diplomatic princess of Solaris, but a queen in her own right, strengthened rather than diminished by the bond they shared. For centuries to come, she murmured, they will tell the story of how war ended, not with conquest, but with union, how the sun and moon found each other in the stars, and how love, Corvus added softly, drawing her into an embrace as the sunlight bathed them both in gold, proved stronger than the hatred of centuries. Their shadows stretched across the tower floor, a single silhouette rather than two separate forms. Beyond the mountains, both Blackcrest and Solaris awaited their return, their shared rule, their vision of a world where differences were not erased but celebrated, where opposites did not destroy but completed each other. The binding that had begun as political strategy had transformed into something far more powerful, a love that bridged kingdoms, species, and the ancient divide between darkness and light.